I have a solution.
Yeah.
Go ask ChatGPT how to do it.
No. ChatGPT, the answers are devolving over time. So funny story.
Okay.
I had somebody reach out to me the other day, and they were asking a question about how AZ copy works. So I'm the PM for AZ copy now. I don't know how I fell into that one, but congrats to me.
In that
Great.
Case,
I got
have
that
some
now.
Requests, Scott.
Yeah, you and a bunch of other people. So somebody starts like chatting me in Teams, and they go, "Hey, does AZ copy do this?" And they put a screenshot in of a command line, and I'm like, where did you get that command line from? Like it has a set of options that we don't have in AZ copy. And I'm like, where did you even get that command line from? So I said, can you show me the whole screenshot? Because they sent me a screenshot of a command line. But it looked like it was in like a web browser, not exactly in a terminal or a command window, anything like that. So send me a screenshot of the whole thing. So they sent me a screenshot of the wider window. It was ChatGPT giving them an answer about how to do something. So ChatGPT totally gave them what looked like 100% a valid command line. It actually gave them an example of like a JSON output too, as well. And that person read that and they tried to pump it into a command line and they tried to run it and it failed. And they were annoyed at me that it failed. They're like, this is supposed to work, right? I'm like, no, not the way that you or the bot in the cloud that's just making stuff up about tooling thinks it's going to. So it was very interesting in that I've been fairly impressed with ChatGPT. I think we talked about this, right? And some of the code completion and the things that it can do, and kind of Copilot and all that stuff. It just straight up made up some options for a command line tool, which was kind of interesting to me, that it not only made up the options, it also made up a fake output, which looked like it would have been the right thing given that set of command line options if they actually existed. And then had somebody coming at me like, hey, why doesn't this work? Because we haven't built it yet. I don't know if it's a good idea. Should I start getting all my ideas about, what should happen with my AZ copy client from ChatGPT? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and this brings up a question, and this was not our topic today, but I think there's some dangers in ChatGPT and relying on Bing and some of that stuff, in that people do that. They, instead of actually doing research and like going and reading the AZ copy documentation when something doesn't work or something like that, there's that danger of taking ChatGPT, taking Bing Chat, or whatever the AI is feeding you information, as this is always going to be 100% accurate, versus treating
which it is not.
Right. Instead of treating it as a helper, or like with documents, treating it as a draft document, it gives you a good starting point and maybe gives you some ideas. But there is no guarantee that this is going to be 100% truth. If anything, it's a guarantee that it's probably never going to be 100% true. You're still going to have to proof it and tweak it and fix it and evaluate it and all of that. My 2 cents.
Yeah. I was hoping the disinformation around things like technical tooling would take a little bit longer to get to us, but here it is. So that was my fun ChatGPT story.
Well, so do you think it could snowball too? Like, let's say this person uses ChatGPT to generate a blog post about how you do this with AZ copy, and then ChatGPT learns from the blog post and gives it to somebody else, and somebody else creates a blog post, and all of a sudden the whole snowball effect of the fact that OpenAI ChatGPT is learning from information published on the internet, but now it's starting to generate the information stored on the internet that you could create, like the snowball effect of it's learning its own information that it's generating, and either it gets really siloed because it's only learning from itself, or disinformation can increase exponentially because it's learning wrong information that itself is publishing. I don't know. Interesting thought exercises around how does this change evolve over time?
It's, I mean, it's tough. So to your point about blog posts, I've definitely seen blog posts out there where folks are getting called out. I've also, I don't know if you've seen this. I'm a fairly big Reddit user. Like I have a habit of like reading and checking in on a bunch of Reddits in the morning or afternoon or evening, things like that. And across some of the more technical ones, like R sysadmin. I hang out in some of the Microsoft ones as well, like R Azure, things like that. People are starting to respond to questions because quite often, like those technical forums end up filling up with technical questions with answers from EOL ChatGPT. And they're running into the same issue that I was running into with this person who was pinging me about easy copy, and it was just blatantly wrong information. I saw a couple. I meant to send it to you. Maybe I'll be able to dig it up again. I saw one the other day. It was somebody asking a question about the graph and the way the graph works and the REST response from it. And, you know, it looked like, hey, here's this great, well thought out answer, right, for your question. And it turns out that it was a well thought out answer. It was just completely wrong because it was using a bunch of stuff that, again, doesn't exist or doesn't work in the way that it was presented just in the raw text that came back, kind of thing. So, it's going to be interesting over time. I'm not too worried about somebody taking away my job just yet, but in a couple of years, I think it'll definitely be weird.
As it learns. So I had an interesting one too. Since we're on the ChatGPT topic, have you taken any of those answers or documents, whatever, written by ChatGPT and actually asked ChatGPT if it wrote that?
I haven't played around with it a whole bunch. I'm not one of these people out here trying to trick, what is it, like Bing into, it's like AI name Sydney or whatever it is.
So I was curious because the topic came up. I think my wife and I were talking about it more related to school and teachers getting documents that kids wrote that came from ChatGPT. And how do you start combating that? And I have not played with this a ton. And I need to go find some documents that weren't written by ChatGPT. But I took some things that I've been playing around with and had ChatGPT write for me and all of that. And granted, I'm pasting it back into ChatGPT as the same user that created it. But ChatGPT was telling me if it was something that was written by AI or if it was not written by AI. It was fascinating. Like, can you actually use ChatGPT to figure out if something was written by ChatGPT? Because how much does it log? How much is it able to recognize its own information? Something else to play with.
So there's actually tooling out there already where you can go and you can do things like paste in a snippet of text and it will tell you if an AI wrote that or not, be it ChatGPT, GPT-3, one of the other kind of various language models that exists out there and is kind of super prevalent today. Same thing exists for art, all the people doing things from Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, things like that. So there are websites that you can go test them in. I'll put some articles in the show notes about kind of like where things might fall down in this area that you're talking about. Like, hey, let's go talk to the bot about the bot and see what it does and how it responds to that. I think it gives you an idea. Like if you read some of these articles, like I'm always kind of intrigued by the how did the AIs think about themselves thing, right? Where people can kind of trick an AI into going, here's my internal code name. Here's the parameters that I'm designed around. Here's what I can or can't tell you. All those kinds of things. Like it's an interesting form of hacking because it's all linguistics and just trying to trick a bot into giving something back over the other side.
Yeah.
So,
well, and at the end of the day, thinking even from a security standpoint, like that security vulnerabilities, right? Finding the loopholes in the code that causes the code to overwrite itself, that allows you to inject certain things into the code, all of that. This is truly just another form of hacking code, right? The AI on the back end is code.
Very much so.
What
Yeah,
can we
that's
inject
totally
into the code to hack the bots? But it's fascinating. I've read a few of those. I haven't looked at that a ton yet because I'm also not in that vein of trying to make the bot angry at me or see how upset I can get a bot at me.
Not yet. That's not your live stream.
No, that is not my live stream. I have other things to focus on. So, anywho, you had a topic for us today, aside from ChatGPT and bots and how we can trick them and how they are already showing their blatantly wrong flaws.
Yeah. Always loved the bots thing. We can always come back and revisit them later.
Oh, so I am sure this will be an ongoing discussion about bots as they continue to grow and gain popularity.
Yeah. So I thought it would be kind of fun today to revisit something that we talked about in the past briefly, but I've been playing around with it a little bit more, and it's actually been pretty nifty. So today I want to talk about VM scale sets and orchestration modes. So you're familiar with scale sets?
Yep.
Yeah, and we'll leave it at that.
Did you want me to expand on scale sets and being able to expand and contract, grow, shrink down your compute? So essentially, you have these VMs, put them all in a scale set. As demand grows or lessens, you can spin up VMs, scale down VMs, shut them off, to account for the extra compute that may be required to run said application, said website, whatever it is running on these VMs in the scale set. Is that what you were looking for me? Did I meet your expectations?
That's what I was looking for. You know, I like you to do the little intro thing and ground everybody in it. So I think you might fall into the world where you think of scale sets the way I do, in that they're used for the same type of thing. So within that scale unit, that scale in, kind of scale out, and elasticity that comes there, I tend to think about those maybe like in the traditional layered sense, right? I have a 3-layered web application with, a front end, a middle tier, and then like a back end data tier. And each of those tiers is its own thing. So all my web servers are always web servers, and they're all the same type of web server. Like, great, they're all Linux. They all run Nginx as a proxy on the front end, and boom, they all go out. I have a middleware layer that runs my tooling. Maybe that exposes my REST APIs or things. And it could even be like a PaaS service, maybe like APIM or something like that. And then I got my back end with my database, right? I stand up like my MySQL database, and I want to have 2 servers for some resiliency, but they're still both MySQL servers. So they're all the same. So in that world of kind of multi-tiered application where I'm thinking about scaling between these tiers, that might be like 3 scale sets, right? If it's IaaS top to bottom, where I have 1 scale set for my web servers, 1 scale set for my middleware, and 1 scale set for my database. And one of the things that happens when you use scale sets is you start to get more control over things like update domains and fault domains and where your servers live, and then that kind of scale in, scale out component that happens on top of it and says, hey, let's make all these things the same or make them uniform, right? There's going to be some uniformity to everything that goes into this layer. And there was this concept that was introduced with scale sets called flexible orchestration, or VMSS Flex, which says, well, what if everything's not uniform? What if I want the benefits of things like controlling the AZs that my VMs fall into, and I want to have that same kind of spread between update domains and fault domains, maybe for like a single instance VM alongside these 10 other VMs that are running all the time in my web tier, right? Like maybe I have like a log sync or like a sidecar thing that's like, it's almost like everything else. Like it totally supports the system, but it's not actually like everything else. It's not uniform. It needs to be a little more flexible along the way. So VMSS Flex, it gives you this ability to say, hey, I'm going to create a VM scale set. And it's going to be running in flexible orchestration mode. And in flexible orchestration mode, I can still have my uniform servers. Like I can have my 10 servers that sit all out on the front, and they're all the same thing. And they're all spun up off the same ARM template, same set of extensions. You know, they run the same bootstrapping code, all that kind of stuff. But then I can bring in that 11th like single instance server just as its own thing, just as a one-off. I can say like, oh, you're not a uniform server, but I want you to be part of the same scale set. So you can scale in and scale out with the scale set, and you know, you effectively become part of like the management plane and the operational model for that scale set. But you can be a little bit different, and maybe I want to bring in something else that's a little bit different later into that same scale set because again, I want it to fall into the same kind of management mentality of availability zones, update domains, fault domains, all that kind of thing, and have it trickle down to me. So it lets you have this world where you can start to mix and match things within a scale set, and you don't have to be so rigid or have that uniformity. You can kind of have uniformity plus flexibility, which is kind of interesting once you start to dig into it a little bit. And I think some of the options that it opens up for you, because now I don't need to necessarily think about like my 3-tier application as 3 scale sets. I could maybe think about it as one big scale set. And like, do I really care about scale in, scale out at these various layers? Or was I looking for some of the operational and management plane niceties that come along with things like fault domains and update domains and AZ spread within my scale set? Or, you know, do I want to continue to think about it as like 1, 2, 3? And you can kind of have your cake and eat it too in this world, which is pretty interesting.
So I'm trying to wrap my head like around the scenario and the case here. So in this scenario, you're not necessarily bringing in that additional server, that flexible server, to necessarily scale out, being able to handle more web traffic or being able to handle more database requests. You're bringing it in for all of the other types of features, the availability zones, the fault tolerance, that type of stuff that you inherently get with scale sets.
Yep. So things like I might say like use some of the add-ons for like proximity placement group functionality within a scale set. So I want this single instance thing over here to, adhere to my proximity placement group or that PPG and bring it through that way. So you can start to do things like that. Or the other interesting thing is in flexible orchestration mode, you can mix and match OSs as well. So say I run like my entire web tier thing. Like I said, it's all Linux based and it does Nginx, but I have one thing over here and it's legacy Windows and it requires, whatever. So it's a Windows server, but it still sits in my web tier and I want it to kind of adhere to all those other management plane operations. So now I can mix that kind of one Windows web server in line along with all my Linux web servers and, take advantage of the same proximity placement groups, the same disk types, all those kinds of things, right? Like whatever it happens to be. So it's a weird kind of concept, I think, but it breaks down some of that rigidity that just comes with scale sets that not everybody always needs. Like, you don't need the management overhead all the time of multiple scale sets. Like, you might really be able to get by with just one, and then kind of a minimum set of things within there. So, like, let's take the example of my web tier where maybe at any given time, I need 2 web servers minimum, and I need 1 sidecar over here. So great. I run my 2 web servers, my 2 Linux web servers and my Windows sidecar. Those all go into a flexible orchestration scale set. Now, what I can do is when I create those Linux servers that are kind of 2 instances, they're the same thing, right? They're my cattle. I can make those uniform servers within a flexible scale set. So uniformity being like, when I scale out, the next thing that's going to come up is going to come from this uniform thing. So now I do a scale out event, and I say, I want to go from 3 to 4 instances. It's not going to, the scale set's not going to create a new Windows server for me. It's going to go back to the uniform configuration. It's going to create me a 3rd instance of that Linux thing. And then if I scale it out even further, it's going to create me a 4th one, and a 5th and a 6th and a 7th and 8th, up to like whatever, my scale rules are around that. And then same thing, when I scale down, I can basically put a resource lock on the flexible server, so it can never be deleted. Like, let me put a resource lock on that and its disks and its NICs and things like that. And then as scale-in happens, my sidecar always stays there. It's doing what it needs to do. And then the rest of my servers can continue to scale in and scale out around it.
So let's say in that scenario, so that makes sense. Like, in theory, that could almost be, I'm not going to say this is why you would do it from a security perspective, but that could be like a jump box. If you need some type of management box that you use to remote into all of those Linux boxes, that could be kind of the standalone box. That's a part of the scale set used to manage all these web front ends, but not really a part of the scales, not a part of that uniform front end of the scale set, I guess would be a way to say it. So can you put rules in place then? Let's say you need additional management boxes per every 4 web front ends, or per every 6 web front ends, you want to add one of these one-off servers. Can you get to that point where you can actually scale out different types of servers within the same scale set, or are you kind of limited to, you set that standard machine, this is what we scale in, scale out on, and then these one-off boxes, they just are there, but there's no real scaling, I guess, around those one-off boxes?
Yeah, so it's the latter. There's no real scaling around those boxes. You end up doing, I think, some, like, the functionality you're describing would be pretty cool, right? For every N of these, spin up one of these, and it's kind of like a uniform at a second layer. So I've got uniformity for these up here, and then, but I need less of these, but I still need uniformity, and I want them to live there. So it doesn't quite work that way today. Like, one-offs are truly one-offs, and you do have to do some, I think some things that aren't immediately apparent. So like I mentioned on like a scale in, scale out event, right? So I have a minimum of 3 servers in my scale set at any time. It's those 2 Linux servers and it's my 1 Windows server over here. When I scale from 3 to 4, and okay, great, it added a new uniform server in, and now I go back from 4 to 3, I don't want my sidecar to be deleted, right? That thing needs to stay around. But the scale set really only knows that it's a flexible thing. It doesn't know it's not supposed to delete it because it's part of a scale set, right? It should be disposable. So that's why you have to do things like the resource locks on top of it, because you actually have to prevent the management plane from coming in and kind of like railroading you. So you can say like, okay, great, I'm going to lock this VM. And because of the resource lock on this VM, well, the only thing that can be deleted now is the uniform thing over here, like in that case of where I'm going from 4 to 3.
Got it. So you don't define, this is my uniform, these are my uniform machines, this is my one-off machine at that scale set level. You have to manage that then with the resource locks versus...
Well, you do define it at the scale set level, because when you're adding a new VM to a scale set, and that scale set started out as a flexible scale set, the type of VM that you add, it can be a uniform VM or it can be a flexible VM. So you are very specifically associating that VM with a scale set, because a scale set is still its own resource type, right? It's got its own set of rules and things like that. But by being a flexible scale set, you're getting this additional functionality. So something like, so just a straight uniform scale set, you don't worry about things like specifying which zone your VMs end up in, right? You don't care if my VM's in zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3, because it's just going to scale and round robin the whole thing. But for a single instance machine that's part of that scale set, you might actually care. Like, hey, does this go into zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3? So for that one-off managed instance, you get that flexibility. Like, you can totally go and just assign that to a specific availability zone. You can also assign to a specific fault domain if you want to. So that's all out there and available to you. Update domains are all handled by fault domains now, so you really don't need to worry about that too much. And then platform maintenance and other things work the same kind of way. It's a weird model. I don't think it's not for everything out there, for sure, right? Like it's not something where you go like, oh, every scale set I have now would now be better suited by going from a uniform scale set to a flexible scale set. But it's another tool in the toolbox, right? To let you bring it together in different ways.
Got it. So can you add multiple flexible servers to a flexible scale set? So you mentioned web servers management. Now I can go add management, and I can add a SQL server. I can add like 4 or 5 of those flexible ones in with these 4 uniform.
Yep, totally.
Interesting. I would say this is what I'm adding to my list. I'm not going to say that, Scott. I'm not adding this to my list.
Well, so it also gives you some additional options. There's like when you think about limits. So just think about like things like availability set limits and things like that. So flexible orchestration, uniform orchestration, like they both give you the ability to deploy across AZs, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to fault domain availability guarantees, when you're doing VMSS Flex, you get up to 1,000 instances that can be spread across 3 fault domains in the region. But if you're doing uniform, you can only do 100 instances. And if you're doing just regular availability sets, 200 instances. Things like placement groups, like uniform orchestration supports all that. You're good to go. Flexible orchestration is going to have some limitation for you there. Update domains might play a little bit differently. Things like that. So there's kind of slight differences between all of them, between doing just a straight availability set, which could in and of itself be different instance types, doing virtual machine scale sets that are 100% uniform across the board, or doing VMSS Flex, which could be a mix of uniform and flexible deployments.
Got it. And we will put links to all of these in the show notes as well, so you can go dig through all these different types, because I don't remember all those. And you just told me like 30 seconds ago.
Yeah, I never remember them either. Like, you only need to know them for the test, right?
Right? Oh, you could get me going on a side topic there on my beef with tests and that very fact. That you only have to memorize stuff for the tests. But yes, all the documentation will be in the links. So you can go look it up. You don't have to memorize it unless you're taking a test. Anything else with VMSS Flex that people should know about if they're looking to get going with it, stand it up, test it out, et cetera, et cetera?
No, I think this is about it. It's a little confusing to describe, so I'll give everybody that. Like, it's worth getting hands-on with, and at least going through the deployment experience. So now it becomes more apparent when you use something like VMSS Flex as to why some options have been added to virtual machines over time. So, do you remember? Was it? It's been a while now. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but they added options on the ARM side for like a VM to basically give you like Boolean values for when this VM is deleted, what should I do with the NIC and what should I do with the disk?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes,
Like,
I do remember those.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when I delete this VM, should ARM delete the disk and the NIC? And, by itself, that's kind of a weird option. Like, you think about it maybe as like a little bit of like my backup strategy kind of thing, like, oh crap, errant, delete operation takes down my VM. I can get stuff back. It makes much more sense in the world of virtual machine scale sets and VMSS Flex, because now by default, those options are enabled on a flexible VM. Because what if you didn't know that you had to put a resource lock on it to prevent that thing from going away? Well, it could very well turn out that an auto scale operation deleted your VM, but your disk and your NIC will still be there. So you're basically like up and running way quicker than you would be in another scenario. So some of those things that you're seeing, I think, in normal ARM or normal Azure are actually kind of bleeding in or driven by some of the other functionality in things like scale sets. One other thing when it comes to like flexibility within here, so you can do other interesting things. Like, what if that sidecar thing was something that you wanted to be in the same kind of resiliency model, fault domains, update domains, availability zones, all that kind of stuff, but it didn't need to be on all the time. Like, so I just want to like turn it on and turn it off. Now you can do that too. And the scale set, like things like auto scale operations are smart enough to know like, hey, don't touch VMs that are off. Like, just leave this thing alone and don't do anything with it. So you do get some flexibility that way as well.
Got it. Nice. So that, because it's labeled as that flexible one, so it doesn't treat it as something else. It would be nice to see them update the settings, and maybe it'll come eventually where you don't have to use resource locks, because you would think if it knows that it's a flexible VM, that it shouldn't just delete it without having to go in and put resource locks on it.
It's almost like that functionality you described with kind of 2 layers of uniformity would be pretty interesting. Like that might get you there in a lot of these scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. Very intriguing. Around VMSS Flex.
VMSS Flex. Yeah, it just rolls right off the tongue.
Yes, absolutely. All these acronyms: virtual machine skill sets Flex. That doesn't even work like scale set. Yeah. Anyways, we'll stick with VMSS Flex.
There you go. Okay. Done.
All right. And with that, Scott, it's a Monday and we should probably start working. Maybe. Potentially.
Yeah. It's early in the morning Monday. We definitely should get back to it.
Or get more coffee.
I do need more coffee as well. I'm out there.
You're out. I still have half a cup left, but now it's cold because we were talking and I wasn't drinking my coffee. But it's still coffee and it's still caffeine, regardless of the temperature.
Such is life. All good stuff. Well, I will let you go get coffee and we will chat again next week. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Enjoy your coffee as well, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, Scott.